We think of love as a warm feeling and a sense of caring. Now, almost all parents have that for their children. Only very traumatized parents who themselves were totally shut down in childhood lack that oceanic sense of love for their children. But that sense of love, that feeling is not sufficient, because it's not what the parent feels that matters, it's what the child receives.
Gabor Mate, you are very, very well known, but just for those that aren't familiar with your work, your training is what?
I'm a medical doctor. I was in family practice for 20 years, and I also did palliative care, looking after terminally ill people. So I've covered all ranges of the human spectrum from birth to death. And then for 12 years, I worked in Vancouver's downtown east side, which houses North America's, the Western world's most concentrated population of drug users. So I worked there for 12 years. And I'm also an author, international speaker. I've written 5 books, published in 43 languages now. And
your new book, The Myth of Normal, is a fantastic book.
Thank you. Well, it was 19 weeks New York Times bestseller. It's been a bestseller in a whole bunch of countries. And,
and your specialty is mainly addiction and trauma and things related to this, right?
You know what?
Or is it just life?
Yes, but really my broad interest is in human development. So what allows people to develop according to their natural tendencies in a healthy way, and what impairs the development, and what are the consequences of that impairment. And they show up in addictions, mental illness, physical illness, personal dysfunctions, relationship problems. So really what I'm interested in is the whole spectrum of human experience and how that is shaped by our interactions with our environment and culture. So anywhere in that range, I'm interested.
Where do we start? What should we ask? What is addiction?
Sure. So I define addiction as manifested in any behavior in which a person finds pleasure or temporary relief and therefore craves it, but then suffers negative consequences and doesn't give it up despite the harm that it causes. So craving relief, pleasure in the short term, harm in the long term, inability or refusal to desist in the long term. That's what an addiction is. And if you understand, that definition does not restrict itself to drugs.
No.
It includes substances, whether legal, like smoking or nicotine or caffeine or alcohol, but or the illicit drugs, but also pornography, sexual roving, gambling, shopping, eating, bulimia, gaming, internet, cell phones, extreme sports, work.
Would laziness be in there too?
Laziness, nobody craves laziness.
Okay.
So again, the definition is if it gives you temporary pleasure, relief, and you crave it. So laziness is more a habit behind which there's all kinds of reasons. But no, it's not an addiction.
Yeah. And what is the role of these addictions?
Well,
vices?
So the medical litany around addiction, that it's a disease of the brain that's largely inherited, which I think is totally nonsense. Some people think it's a manifestation of weakness of will or moral failure, which is also nonsense, that it's a choice that people make. When I talk to anybody, can I make this responsive with you? According to my definition, have you ever had an addictive pattern? I don't care what it was, but yes or no?
Of course, yes.
Okay. Let me ask you this question then. Not what was wrong with the addiction, and I don't care what the addiction even was. What I'm asking is what was good about it. What did you get from it? Temporarily.
Feeling secure and safe, maybe?
Security and safety. Now, who doesn't want security and safety? In other words, that's a human need, actually. In other words, the addict just wants to feel like a human being. And It also means that the addiction wasn't your primary problem. Your primary problem was lack of safety and security, which then goes back to trauma. So my mantra on addiction is don't ask why the addiction, ask why the pain. What is the underlying pain that the addiction is trying to temporarily soothe? So that's the role of addiction. It's a forlorn, self-destructive attempt to solve the problem of human suffering. That's what it is.
And on my channel, there are thousands of examples of the terribly traumatic experiences that people have had, especially in their childhoods. Do any of us get through childhood unscathed? Soft-White Underbelly is about giving people a space to tell their stories. Directly.
Unscathed. Well, again, unscathed.
Without a traumatic...
Well, so let's differentiate between hurt and pain and trauma. It's impossible to get through human life without being hurt, without experiencing pain. It's just the nature of existence. But that's not what trauma is. Trauma is not hurt or pain. Trauma is a wound that hasn't healed. And yes, it's possible to get through childhood without being wounded. But in this culture, it's almost impossible. That's why the subtitle of my book is Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture. Because I think this culture wounds people from even before birth onwards. Now, if you look at human history, prehistory, we evolved in small groups, very communal, very collaborative, very supportive, where the members were very secure that they belonged to the community. Children were surrounded by loving adults. So it's possible to grow up without trauma. It's not possible to grow up without pain, but not everything painful is traumatic. Everything traumatic is painful, but you can have pain without being traumatized by it, depending on the environment and the support that you have.
As a society, are we getting better or worse?
Oh, it's getting worse.
Is it?
On the one hand, there's more awareness, there's more methods, there's more science, but if you look at it from the point of view of human needs of either children or adults, it's getting more and more difficult. Children have the need for absolute security, which you didn't have, or safety, belonging in an attachment relationship. That's not negotiable. Oxygen is not negotiable. Security and safety for a child is not negotiable. It's a need. If we don't get it, we suffer. Children have a need to be able to experience all the emotions that nature gave them and to be able to express them and have those emotions validated and mirrored by the adults in a positive way. Adults adults or children, we all have a need to belong, to be connected with. That's our nature. Now, adults have a need for a sense of belonging. They have a need to be authentic, which means that they could be their true selves without having to follow and mold themselves according to the demands of their environment. And they have a need for meaning and purpose. Now, if you look at any of those needs that I've just outlined, this society is less and less capable of meeting them. Children are less and less safe and secure because the parents are more and more stressed. There's much less sense of belonging because communities, extended families have been eroded significantly. There's increasing isolation and loneliness. And in that context, no, it's getting worse. And, your recent Surgeon General in the States here, Dr. Vivek Murthy, wrote a book about loneliness. And loneliness is an epidemic in society. So is obesity. And both of those are harmful to health. And that's just one example. Here in the United States, where we're speaking, 70% of adults are at least on one medication. And 40% are at least on two. This is in the wealthiest country in the world. This is a toxic culture.
And of course, childhood trauma, in all its forms is damaging to a person. Also, neglect is also a problem.
Well, you're absolutely right. So if you look at, there were studies done in California called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Studies. They looked at 17,000 adults at their childhood histories and their adult health. And they identified 10 factors that they called adverse childhood experiences, very famous ACE studies, published all over the world, which is why most doctors never heard about them. But that's a whole other story of what doctors hear and that they don't hear. Adverse childhood experiences included physical, sexual, or emotional abuse, violence in the family, a parent being addicted, a parent being mentally ill, a parent dying, a divorce, or a neglect. And each of these added to the risk of addiction exponentially. So by the time a male child had 6 of them, his risk of becoming an injection-using drug addict as an adult was 4,600% greater than that of a male child with no such experience, a 46-fold increase. And that was done in California. To those adverse childhood experiences, we also have to add poverty and racism, because they can also create extreme harm to the psyche, the brain, and the body.
And can trauma be transferred, I think it's called epigenetically, where it goes from one generation to the next, even almost like in the DNA?
I'm glad you said almost in the DNA.
Not yes.
Because it's not in the DNA. The DNA doesn't change, but genes are turned on and off by the environment. So it's like a musical score, which doesn't tell you how loud or how softly you should play that's the epigenetics. It's which genes are turned on and turned off. And so traits can be passed on epigenetically, like we know this in animals. You make the grandfather mice scared, and then you expose, and then the grandchild, which is not exposed to the same scary stimulus, is still afraid. So the fear was passed on epigenetically. But that's only one way. Trauma in general is multi-generational, so that it's not just passed on epigenetically, it's also passed on to the fact that parents who are traumatized and who hasn't resolved or even understood or even been aware of their trauma, when they bear children, will almost automatically pass their traumas on to their kids through their behaviors and emotional patterns and so on. I mean, I did, and so it's not, nobody's here to be blamed, but trauma is almost always multi-generational.
And is the solution to just learn how to love each other unconditionally as parents?
Well, it depends what we mean by love, because we think of love as a warm feeling and a sense of caring. Now, almost all parents have that for their children. Only very traumatized parents, who themselves were totally shut down in childhood, lack that oceanic sense of love for their children. But that sense of love, that feeling, is not sufficient, because it's not what the parent feels that matters, it's what the child receives. If the parent loves the child but is themselves too traumatized to actually see the child and to attune to the child, then the love doesn't get through. The sense of love gets through, and that's good, but to be truly loved, you have to be seen. And a lot of parents have great difficulty actually seeing their kids for who they are, without their own anxieties and expectations and their own emotional reactions and so on. So that love has to get through. And for that love to really get through, the parent has to be able to attune to the child. And which is to say the parent gets the child's internal experience and knows how to respond to it. And when parents are stressed, as many of them are in this society, they have great difficulty being attuned to the child. That's so attunement here is the key. And
so maybe teaching us how to be better parents, teaching us how to love ourselves and love each other could possibly help?
Yes, but yes, but it's not a matter of teaching. You can't teach somebody how to love themselves.
You need an example?
Because it's not like you can teach them mathematics or American history. Self-love is not a skill. It's actually an attribute of the human being, and what we really have to look at is help people remove the blocks towards self-love. And one of the impacts of trauma, you're quite right to talk about self-love, because one of the greatest impacts of trauma is that people have a deep, abiding sense of shame about themselves, and they're highly judgmental of themselves. And so the way towards self-love is to remove the blocks to it, rather than here's how you do it. And that's a lifelong process, let me tell you.
Yeah. And even stress during pregnancy or early childhood can shape someone's patterns?
Well, there was an article from the Harvard Center on the Developing Child 13 years ago now, published in the Journal Pediatrics. And it's on early childhood development. It's a classic article. And it said that the process of brain development begins before birth and continues into adulthood, and establishes either a fragile or a robust framework for all health, learning, behavior. The fact is, we know now from multiple studies that when women are stressed during pregnancy, the stress hormones that she then generates from her adrenal gland go through to the infant with a negative impact on the infant's brain development. And women who are severely depressed or stressed during pregnancy, their children are much more likely to have developmental problems, mental health issues a few years later. So that's just not even controversial. So when people talk to me about how do you prevent addiction, and everybody thinks you prevent addiction by going to schools and telling kids how bad addictions are. Useless. Because the kids who are listening to adults are not at risk, and the kids who are at risk are not listening to adults. The prevention of addiction needs to begin at, or any mental health issue, needs to begin at the first prenatal visit. So, as a medical doctor, I delivered a lot of babies, about 1,000 in 20 years. And I was well trained to look after the physical needs, the physical requirements, checking the blood pressure, the weight, the diet, the blood sugar levels, and so on. Nobody ever told me to ask the woman, how are you feeling emotionally? How is your relationship? How much calmness or how much stress do you feel? Who do you ask for help when you need it? Those questions are not taught to medical students. And yet, the woman's emotional states do have an impact already on the infant. So that it begins really early.
Do you believe any child escapes trauma completely?
Yeah, I do. Some, but it's a minority.
What does it look like as an adult?
An adult who is comfortable with who they are, who's in touch with their authentic self, which means with their gut feelings, their body, and their gut and their heart, who respects their own individuality and the individuality of others, and can interact with people in a non-defensive, non-reactive way, and can respond to the present situation based on the needs of the present, not some programming from the past. And by the way, speaking of trauma, when I was working in the downtown east side of Vancouver, in 12 years, I didn't have a single female patient who had not been sexually abused as a child. No.
Really?
And all the men had been either neglected or abused, or, this is the extreme. But in this society, there's such a punitive attitude towards people who are drug addicted. And there's two fundamental flaws about that. One is we're blaming people for having been hurt and being desperate to escape from their pain. Number one. Number two, those people who are drug addicted are no different from the rest of us. When I was working with these people, I saw myself in them. I had my own addictive behaviors. I manipulated and I lied about them, and my addictive behaviors had an impact on my family and even on my work. Only thing is, it wasn't to drugs. So I didn't face any medical consequences or legal consequences. But they were no different from me in the sense of the desperation to escape from the discomfort that they're experiencing.
You were a workaholic.
I was a workaholic, and I was also had a significant shopping addiction. So I shopped relentlessly. I spent thousands of dollars in an afternoon on compact discs, and by the evening I was back in the store.
Classical music?
Sorry?
Classical music?
Classical music, yeah. But it wasn't the music that I was addicted to. It was the shopping. I had to have that hit. And you always think when you're addicted that just one more will do it. If I just get this particular piece of item or disc, I'll be complete. An hour later, you're running back to the store again. Because every addict looks for a quick hit of dopamine. And dopamine is the brain chemical that makes us feel alive and vital and present and motivated. And of course, that dopamine hit is very temporary. So if you look at the brain scans of pornography addicts, there's the surges of dopamine. It's not the pornography they're addicted to, it's the dopamine. They just happen to get the release of dopamine through the pornography. The gambler is the same thing. The gambler is not after money, because typically a gambler wins a lot of money in the slot machine in the evening. By the morning, he's losing it again. He's after the excitement, the anticipation. The sex addict is not after sex as such, because if they were, the solution to sex addiction was very simple. Just marry another sex addict. Then you can have all the sex you want for the rest of your life. No, it's the conquest, it's the hunt, it's the excitement, it's that dopamine surge. And everybody who's addicted, that's what they're addicted to. And so why are we blaming these people who are using drugs?
Why do so many people relapse, even after years of being sober and doing well?
That again has to do with the addicted brain. So what we have to understand here is that the human brain develops in interaction with the environment. It's not genetically determined. There's 20,000 genes or so in the human organism. About 10,000 are dedicated to the central nervous system in the brain. And the brain has billions and trillions of connections. There's not enough genes to program our brains. So the second sentence from that Harvard article that I cited is that the interactions of genes and experiences literally shapes the circuitry of the developing brain. So it's not the genes, it's the action of the environment on the genes, shapes the circuitry of the developing brain, and is significantly influenced by the mutual responsiveness of adult-child relationships, particularly in the early years. Now, the circuitry that doesn't develop when the addict will develop is the opiate endorphin circuitry, our internal opiates. That's why they want to do morphine. And endorphins are essential for pain relief, for pleasure and reward, and for love. And so I asked a patient of mine in the downtown east side once, a 27-year-old woman, she had HIV. And I asked her, what does the heroin do for you? And she said, first time I did heroin, it felt like a warm, soft hug. She was just looking for love because her own circuitry had not developed because of the childhood trauma. Then the dopamine circuitry, which is the motivation, seeking, vitality circuitry, that doesn't develop. And stress regulation circuitry also doesn't develop. And stress regulation means that when something happens, I respond proportionately to what's going on in the present moment. But when the stress regulation doesn't develop properly, I don't know how to regulate my stresses. I don't know how to calm myself down after a stressful incident. And so when you talk to people who relapse, over and over again, you ask them, well, what happened just before you relapsed? Usually, something stressful happened that they didn't know how to cope with, and then they go back to the known entity, which is the addiction, that will soothe their stress. Like it might soothe your insecurity and lack of safety temporarily. So usually relapse is a response to stress, and that's the whole problem with the addiction treatment industry and even the 12-step movement. As much as I admire and support the 12 steps, but they're missing the trauma piece. So somebody can, and there's a distinction between abstinence and sobriety. Abstinence means you're not using something. That's great, nothing wrong with it. But sobriety means that you can actually soberly consider your situation. So a lot of people give up the substance without becoming sober. And that means when they get stressed, they go for the tried and true.
And what role does shame play in keeping people trapped in these cycles of addiction?
Shame is huge. And that's one of the greatest impacts of trauma, is a deep sense of shame about the self. And people think that shame is a response to what they did or they didn't do. No. They think they're ashamed of themselves because they're addicted. Actually, it goes the other way around. The shame came long before the addiction. And the shame has all kinds of sources, but again, it has to do with early trauma, early neglect, or early disconnection. If a child is suffering, either because bad things are being done to them, or because they're not getting their needs met in a positive sense, the child can make two assumptions unconsciously. One is, the world is screwed, my parents are incompetent or cruel, here I am. The other assumption is, these bad things are happening to me because there's something wrong with me fundamentally, and if I work hard enough, maybe I can fix it. Now, which belief do you think is more acceptable to the child? It's obviously the second one. At least it gives him some sense. So even the shame comes along as a kind of adaptation, but it's debilitating. Shame is the worst state. When you're shamed, you just don't want to be here. You want to sink into the ground and you want to even further isolate yourself.
Yeah, shame is a horrible emotion.
It's the worst state there is. It's the worst state there is, and it's very common. And then we try all these ways to escape from the shame by projecting a self-image that we want to identify with, by pleasing others so they won't reject us, by suppressing our needs. One of the great difficulties people have is just asking for help. They don't know how to ask for help. Now, no infant is born not knowing how to ask for help. That's all they do.
It's crying.
But at a certain point, we learn that our asking for help invites a negative response from our caregivers. Then we get ashamed of even asking for help. I say this a lot of the time, but have you seen this book by this British guy called Charlie McKeesey called The Boy, the Mole, the Horse, and the Fox?
No.
Okay, it's one of these children's books that are for adults. That is for adults. It's mostly illustrations. He's a wonderful illustrator. The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. It's an international bestseller, sold millions of copies. Amongst his four friends, the horse is the wisest one. And at some point, they ask the horse, what's the most courageous thing you ever said? And the horse says, help. Now, people are ashamed of themselves. They don't even ask for help. So shame is debilitating.
Can someone truly heal without first addressing their underlying trauma?
Can people heal without addressing the trauma? Well, literally the meaning of the word trauma comes from the Greek. It means a wound. So can people heal without healing the wound? No, they can't. They can put on all, they can behave the right way, they can present the right way, but are they healed underneath? No, they're not. I think the wound has to be, and the beauty of it is, in my understanding, and not just my understanding of astute colleagues, is that trauma is not what happened to you. Trauma is the wound that you sustained. Trauma is what you made it mean. Trauma is the shame. Trauma is the self-rejection. Trauma is the ongoing pain. So trauma is a wound that hasn't healed, which is the good thing. Because if trauma is a wound that hasn't healed, then you can heal it in the present. If the trauma was what happened to you all those years ago, it's gone, finished. It'll never not have happened. But trauma being a wound, yes, anybody can be healed at any stage of life, as long as there's consciousness.
Sexual trauma as a child, which I've covered a lot of stories that involve that, seems to be such a debilitating form of trauma.
Yeah. Well, in sexual trauma, your very body is invaded and you become an object. You don't exist as a human being. You're simply the means to somebody else's pleasure or gratification or sense of power. So your sense of self is obliterated, and the shame is deep.
And then there's silence on top of it.
Sorry?
And then they're silent about it on top of it.
Well, that's the whole point. Like, I talk to anybody who was sexually abused as a child. I know you had my friend Kimberly Shannon Murphy on
Yes.
Some months ago, and she told very quickly the really disturbing story of her perennial sexual victimization.
Yeah, horrifying story.
By her grandfather. And when I was talking to Kimberly when I first met her, she was naturally focused on what the grandfather had done. But then I asked her a question. Then I asked it of anybody who was traumatized. Who did you speak to? And the answer is almost nobody. In other words, by the time the abuse started, the child already knew intuitively that they were alone and helpless. And that's what potentiated the trauma. Because the perpetrator can tell with almost laser-like accuracy who's undefended. It's not the child's fault. But by the time the abuse happens, this isolation also happens, so people then don't ask for help. Remember the infamous case of Dr. Larry Nassar, who was the physician to the Olympic gymnast team. Girls that he looked after would wear double underwear to his office to minimize the sense of what he was doing to them, but they never told their parents. Most of them never told their mothers. And the ones who, and of course also what happened is when they did tell, and then the parents tried to do something, the Olympic Association dismissed it, just ignored it. So that this silence, this cone of silence surrounds the sexual abuse victim, whether in a family of origin or in the institutions at large.
How can parents break the cycle when they're still carrying their own wounds?
Well, look, when I first became a parent, I had no idea I was even wounded. I just thought this is life. So when you ask how does a parent break the cycle, if they know they're wounded, that's already a huge step forward. That's already a huge step forward. That's the beginning. The Buddha said somewhere that the Buddha was a great psychologist. All the great spiritual teachers are wonderful psychologists, by the way. I mean, they just see into the human soul. And Buddha said that once you know the source of your suffering, you're already in a way towards healing. So the parents who know that they've been traumatized, they can get all kinds of help to deal with their traumas, and that'll ensure they will not pass pass it on, or they'll pass on much less of it to their children. And there's all kinds of ways, but being aware that you're traumatized is cold, and you become an object. You don't exist as a human being. You're simply the means to somebody else's pleasure or gratification or sense of power. So your sense of self is obliterated, and the shame is deep.
And then there's silence on top of it.
Sorry?
And then they're silent about it on top of it.
Well, that's the whole point. Like, I talk to anybody who was sexually abused as a child. I know you had my friend Kimberly Shannon Murphy on
Yes.
Some months ago. And she told very eloquently the really disturbing story of her perennial sexual victimization.
Yeah, horrifying story.
By her grandfather. And when I was talking to Kimberly when I first met her, she was, naturally focused on what the grandfather had done. But then I asked her a question, and I asked it of anybody who was traumatized, who did you speak to? And the answer is almost nobody. In other words, by the time the abuse started, the child already knew intuitively that they were alone and helpless. And that's what potentiated the trauma. Because the perpetrator can tell with almost laser-like accuracy who is undefended. It's not the child's fault. But by the time the abuse happens, this isolation also happens, so people then don't ask for help. Remember the infamous case of Dr. Larry Nassar, who was the physician to the Olympic gymnast team? Girls that he looked after would wear double underwear to his office to minimize the sense of what he was doing to them, but they never told their parents. Most of them never told their mothers. And the ones who, and of course also what happened is when they did tell, and then the parents tried to do something, the Olympic Association dismissed it, just ignored it. So that this silence, this cone of silence surrounds the sexual abuse victim, whether in the family of origin or in the institutions at large.
How can parents break the cycle when they're still carrying their own wounds?
Well, look, when I first became a parent, I had no idea I was even wounded. I just thought this is life. So when you ask how does a parent break the cycle, if they know they're wounded, that's already a huge step forward. That's already a huge step forward. That's the beginning. The Buddha said somewhere that the Buddha was a great psychologist. All the great spiritual teachers are wonderful psychologists, by the way. I mean, they just see into the human soul. And Buddha said that once you know the source of your suffering, you're already in a way towards healing. So the parents who know that they've been traumatized, they can get all kinds of help to deal with their traumas, and that'll ensure they will not pass it on, or they'll pass on much less of it to their children. And there's all kinds of ways, but being aware that you're traumatized, and then having the awareness that in order not to pass this on to my kids, I got to work on myself, that's the best thing they can do.
Is it possible to repair relationships with our children after years of disconnection?
Funny you should ask, because I wrote The Myth of Normal with my son Daniel, who is 50 years old this month, as we speak. Daniel and I are now working on a new book. It's called Hello Again, a fresh start for parents and adult children. And believe me, we've had to work at it. And yes, it is possible if the will. It's not always possible or even desirable. But in many cases, if there's some scintilla of willingness there, yes, it is possible.
What would you say to a parent who feels guilt for the way they raised their child?
Yeah. Well, you're talking to one of them. At least for many years, I carried a lot of guilt. Here's what I would say to them. Yes, you're right to acknowledge that the way you showed up for your children hurt them, or maybe the way you didn't show up for them hurt them. But what morning did you decide to hurt your kids? What decision did you make to make them suffer? You never did. You did your best. That was your best at the time. That's who you were at the time. So guilt is totally inappropriate. You're not to be blamed. It's fine that you should acknowledge that it happens. A bit of healthy regret is always a good thing. But guilt, and guilt implies you did something and you knew better and you didn't do it. Well, you didn't know any better. Or if you did know better, something in you prevented from fulfilling what you knew. There was some trauma there. So it's not deliberate on your part, never was. And so guilt is totally inappropriate. Parents should never be blamed. That doesn't mean we don't acknowledge what they did or didn't do. It also doesn't mean that the child shouldn't feel angry about it. You know what I said to my kids once I became aware of all this stuff? I said, I'm not worried you'll be angry with me. I'm worried you won't be angry enough. I want people to experience, a lot of people who are hurt, there's a lot of anger there that'll be suppressed. That suppression of anger has got terrible consequences. So I'm not saying there's no room for anger. I'm not saying there's no room for genuine, healthy remorse, but guilt. And that's the first thing. The second thing is, no child wants to be seen as the parent's mistake. If I look at my kids, and if I see only my guilt, I'm not seeing them. I'm just projecting my own stuff onto them. I need to see them for who they are. And when you look at them through the eyes of guilt, you're doing them no favor whatsoever.
I think in romantic relationships, in marriage, for example, it's really important when you have, let's call it a fight or an argument, whatever, with your partner, to allow them to come back without shame.
Well, absolutely. And
super important.
Absolutely. It's so difficult.
Even after they've fucked up terribly, you allow them to come back with their head held high.
And my own pattern in relationship has been, and I've been married this year, it'll be 56 years. But my own pattern has been, when there's a rupture, I withdraw in a sullen, punitive, rageful kind of way. You know, that's ingrained into my nervous system from my infancy. Then you feel even more ashamed. Now, there's a wonderful colleague of mine, Dr. Ed Tronick, Tronick, who is one of the seminal figures in looking at child-parent relationships. And he says that rupture and repair are an inevitable and even necessary part of human relationships. So ruptures will happen between child and parent, between married couples, between friends. As long as you recognize that rupture and repair are natural human attributes, and once we've had the rupture, we go back to the repair without shame, just with some curiosity about what happened here and what was my own role in it. Well, what did you do to me? But which is my own tendencies. You know. We all want to be victims, and because when you're a victim, you have no responsibility. I don't recommend victimhood to anybody. As much as acknowledge what happened, but in a relationship, the most important thing you can do is to look at your own role in it, what you contributed to the situation.
It's interesting how we create our worst fears in our lives.
Oh, yeah.
And if you're afraid of being betrayed, if you're afraid of being a victim, you're afraid of, like, you'll subconsciously almost create that scenario.
You will, and when you form relationships, you'll almost inevitably find somebody who will fulfill your worst nightmares. So it's interesting. So when we get into relationships, we kind of get together with our dream lover, but we also get together with our nightmare lover. And the dream lover is what we see, you know. The nightmare lover is what we carry in our unconscious. And that's what we're going to attract to ourselves. Which is okay, as long as both partners are willing to work on it together and use the relationship as a template for growth.
In relationships, especially in romantic relationships, it's helpful to almost be your own psychologist.
Your own psychologist?
Yeah. Your own relationship coach.
Well, if you can, what you need to do is to be at least curious. I mean, what do you mean by your own psychologist, by the way?
Well, like understanding why your partner is behaving that way, and seeing through their behavior that's pushing you away.
Yeah, you have to get what their experience is.
Exactly. Seeing things from their side of the fence.
Exactly. Like in my marriage relationship, almost any time I feel myself aggrieved and perceive myself as victimized, and I'm assuming that I know what the motives of my partner are, then when we talk about it, it's like a totally flip. No, that's not what she was intending at all, and she had a totally different experience. But the natural tendency is to identify with the hurt ego and then not see the other person's experience.
Forgiveness is a very powerful tool.
What do you mean by forgiveness?
Just in terms of relationships, like.
Yeah, but what do you mean by forgiveness?
Understanding what that behavior was why it happened, what created it.
Excellent. If by forgiveness you mean understanding, then
understanding.
Yes. Yeah, that's great. What does Jesus say on the cross?
I don't know.
He says, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." He actually knows that these people persecuting him, they don't know what they're doing. That's his greatness. You know, he's in touch with deep love, and he sees the frailty of the very people that are killing him. And he understands. So he says, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." So that forgiveness and understanding, yes. Now, that doesn't mean you put up with it. You know, so that, you know, if somebody's in an abusive relationship, understanding what the other person does does not take away from you the necessity of perhaps leaving that relationship. So you still have to take care of yourself. As a matter of fact, in an abusive relationship, I'm not even saying that you should understand your partner's behavior. You should understand your own. You should understand why you're still here. What is it that's compelling you to put up with this and to subject yourself to it? What sense of shame keeps you believing that you deserve this? So I think in an abusive relationship, I don't talk about forgiveness much. I talk about, you know, self-awareness.
Yeah. Are you? But you can call yourself religious?
Religious?
Yeah.
Not in the least. I've never been religious in my life.
Yeah, same here.
I mean, I'm a Jew, but I never believed in the religion. In the sense, look, I grew up in communist Hungary till I was 13, and there used to be a joke there that in Eastern Europe, that you could be honest, intelligent, or a member of the Communist Party. As a matter of fact, you could be any two of those three things, but not all three at the same time. Because if you're honest and intelligent, you wouldn't join the party. If you joined the party, if you're intelligent, you couldn't be honest, and so on. Now, that was my same attitude towards the God that I was sold. God is supposed to be all good, omniscient, and omnipotent. And as soon as I had a brain or a mind, I said, well, if God is all good and all-knowing, that he can't be powerful. Otherwise, how come Auschwitz happened? How come my grandparents died in a gas chamber? How come I nearly died in a gas chamber as an infant? So, if God is all powerful and knows everything, he can't be any good. Otherwise, he wouldn't have allowed, So, no, I never believed in that. As a matter of fact, what's interesting looking back is I used to be enraged even at the word God. And I've been thinking for decades now, well, what was that rage about? It was about, because I wanted to believe. I wanted to believe in something greater than me, this little ego. And that God image that they were selling me just got in the way. So if you ask me if I'm religious now, no, I'm not. I don't have religious practice, I don't have religious beliefs. But do I think there's something greater than me? Yeah. That we belong to, that we're part of, that we manifest, that manifests us. I mean, these are words, but I truly sense that there's truth there. And some people have experienced it directly. I haven't, but I trust their experience. And I also, that's the only way to understand the universe.
Tell us about your childhood, how you grew up.
Well, so I'm almost tired of telling the story.
Yeah, you can do an abbreviated version if you want.
It kind of, I made a very poor career move by choosing to be born as a Jewish infant in Hungary in 1944. Some people say you choose your birth. What an idiot would choose to be a Jewish baby in 1944, 2 months before the Nazis occupied Hungary and killed 500,000 Jews, including my grandparents, and persecute us. And I nearly died. I was very sick. To save my life, my mother gave me to a stranger, so I didn't see her for 6 weeks. That was my infancy. My father came back from forced labor when I was 15 months of age, the first time I saw him. Then we grew up in communist Hungary, and what I remember is we had a loving family. And my parents didn't see me. I mean, they couldn't. They had problems, actually, but they sure loved us. And it was a stable family home. And I read a lot. I was very serious. I was always thinking. Truth and justice were essential to my soul from an early age on. I stood up for kids in school who were being bullied. I experienced some anti-Semitism in school. At the same time, I was obviously troubled. I wet my bed till I was 13. My mother took me to a psychologist when I was 8 or 9, and the psychologist says, "Ma'am, if the only problem this kid has is that he wets his bed, you're lucky." Well, it wasn't the only problem I had, it turned out. So, I had a supportive environment, and I played, friends and family outings and so on. My parents had a stable marriage, they respected each other. But I was deeply scarred by my first 1.5 years. And my mother, when I look back to it, she wasn't a very warm person. So she did a lot of work to meet our needs, but warmth was not something she was capable of giving us. So that's the kind of childhood that I had, and I lived in Hungary till I was 13, and then the Hungarian Revolution broke out against communist rule, and then we became refugees, came to Canada.
How do you think what your childhood experiences were affects your work that you do now?
My work? Well, for some reason, and people have often said this, I'm very comfortable with pain. Not my own, but other people. I'm not afraid of people's pain. So I can be with their pain. And that's given me a lot of power in my work as a physician and addictions worker and healer. I'm not shy, I'm not afraid of other people's pain. I can be with their pain. So that's a positive thing.
Do you see it as, when you hear someone telling their gruesome story of their childhood, do you see that as freeing them to maybe get access to what might heal them?
That's the whole point.
Yeah.
They were never heard or seen. And so to hear them and see them and witness them is a powerful healing, powerful aid to healing.
Yeah.
So that's how I also became a workaholic, as a result of childhood experience. That made me do a lot of work, but it also had negative impacts on my emotional, physical health, and certainly the well-being of my family. But it's part of my childhood formative. I think the biggest capacity is the curiosity that I have. I'm really curious.
Yeah, me too.
I think that's one of the attributes that I see when you interview people, really deep curiosity about people. And so I really have that. Curious about the world, what makes things tick, why are things the way they are, why am I the way I am. So I think that willingness to be with the pain and deep curiosity. And you know what? There's this phrase, compassion. People tell me that I manifest a lot of it, and I think I do. I really care about people's suffering, and I really don't want them to suffer. And I want to know why they're suffering, and I'm going to help them with that. And so those are the attributes that I think my childhood contributed to.
That's great. Do you believe modern society itself is traumatizing?
Yeah, again, the subtitle of my book is Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture. So I think we live in a toxic culture. So look, here's the analogy that I give. Let's say you're a laboratory scientist, and you're growing microorganisms in a petri dish. And so you have to give them a certain brew in which they're going to live and proliferate. We call that a laboratory culture. You say we're culturing microorganisms. If those microorganisms were thriving, but thriving, so this is a healthy culture. But what if 70% of them were sick? What if they weren't proliferating the way they should? What if they manifested strange behaviors? You say this is a toxic culture. Well, apply that to human beings. Going back to what I said earlier, you see increasing chronic illness among children in this society right now. You see increasing mental health conditions amongst children. ADHD, which is what I was diagnosed with, it was the subject of my first book. So-called oppositionality, which doesn't even exist as far as I'm concerned. Spectrum disorders, depression, anxiety. In the United States, over the last few years, every year, more people died of drug overdoses than died in the Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghan wars put together. This is every year. Now, if we understand that human beings, as a great American physician, George Engels said in 1977, if we understand that human beings are biopsychosocial creatures, which means to say that their biology is inseparable from their psychology, because the mind and the body are one, and from their social relationships, then what do you make of a society where there's so much disease, illness, mental dysfunction, and all kinds of other ailments? It's a toxic, traumatizing culture.
How do poverty, racism, and inequality compound trauma?
So there's been major studies in inequality. And in a society, as inequality rises, stress rises, obesity rises, heart disease goes up, and so on. That's not controversial. It's been studied up to yin. Poverty. Extreme poverty is toxic to the brain, largely because of the stress that exists in families in extreme poverty. You can look at the life expectancy of people in Philadelphia or Chicago, I forget which city now, but this is true in Canada as well. In one neighborhood, the life expectancy could be 20 years shorter than in another neighborhood because of poverty. That much. Racism. Studies have shown people have trouble believing this, but it's just so obvious that the more episodes of racism a black American woman is exposed to, the greater her risk for asthma. If you look at not to get too technical here, but there's a structure called telomeres at the end of our chromosomes. And telomeres are DNA structures that are like the aglets on my shoe here, that they keep the strands from unraveling. We're born with about 10,000 units of these telomeres. By the time we die, we have 4,000. Because as we age and the stress, they fray. They fray. Now, the telomeres are kind of a cellular clock. They tell you how biologically aged you are. If you look at the telomeres of women who are the chronic caregivers of chronically ill kids, they're shorter. They're biologically aged. If you look at the telomeres of black people in the United States, they're 7 years shorter than those of non-white, of Caucasian people. That's racism. And there's been studies that have shown that if you look at inflammation in the body, and there's ways of measuring levels of inflammation, the more racism, the more inflammation in the body. So that's how racism comes into it. There's a great Canadian physician, no longer alive, Clyde Hertzman, who talks about how poverty and racism get under the skin. Literally they do. They affect the nervous system, the gut, the immune system, inflammation, and so on and so on. So that, again, the point here is you can't separate the mind from the body, and you can't separate the mind from our social relationships, because our social relationships are reflected in how our minds function. So all these things are significant factors.
Back to addiction. Are the parts of us that act out in these self-destructive ways trying to protect us from something underneath?
Well, I think that's my whole point, is that the addictive behavior is an attempt to protect us from our emotional pain, our insecurity, our anxiety, our sense of isolation. When I speak to hundreds or thousands of people, and I give my definition of addiction, and I ask, according to that definition, how many of you would acknowledge that you've had some addictive pattern in your life? Just about everybody puts their hands up, just about everybody. There are a few people who are either blessed or they're liars. They don't put their hands up, vast majority. Then I ask individuals, just as I asked you, what's wrong with the addiction? What's right about it? What did they do for you? Stress relief, pain relief, and numbing. When do people need to get numbed? When they go to the dentist and there's going to be pain. It gave me a sense of control. It gave me a sense of belonging, a sense of love. All these things are wonderful attributes. And if we lack them, it's not because we're deficient, but because they were shut down somehow owing to trauma. So again, the addiction is really an attempt to protect us from the impacts of trauma. Again, as you and I both know, it's an attempt that ends up as a total failure, but that's the attempt.
Why does an addict often seem to become like the worst version of themselves when they're in the grips of their addiction?
Why do they become...
Like the worst version of themselves. It's almost like they're possessed by something evil.
Well, they are possessed. But by the way, I personally stay away from the language of worst. There's a judgment implied there. What if we actually spelled it out? If we didn't call it the worst? Why did they become somebody who does something against their own values? Like
self-destructive.
Yeah, they can be self-destructive, they can be dishonest with other people and themselves, they can be manipulative, they will do things to themselves that will harm their bodies. Why do that? Well, again, because they're so desperate for temporary pain relief. That's all there is to it. So it's not a moral question for me. It's a question of why they're in so much pain.
But the temporary pain relief comes with the behavior that'll make them dishonest and...
Yeah, when I was in my addictive phase, I lied to my wife regularly. And shamelessly. Well, ultimately the shame came, but at the moment, so that addiction brings along all these behaviors necessarily. But they're not, it's not as the worst version of myself, it's me and it's me being unconscious.
And why does an emotional disconnection often lead to a moral disconnection?
Okay, yeah, so why does emotional disconnection lead to moral disconnection? There's a wonderful psychologist, not retired, still active, but retired from her academic career, Darsha Narvaez, professor emerita of psychology at Notre Dame University. And she studied the development of human morality. In fact, she wrote a wonderful book about the development of human morality that I quote in The Myth of Morality. And Darsha and others have found that morality, empathy for others, ethical behavior is a natural outcome of healthy relationships in childhood. So these are not qualities that you have to inculcate into a child or teach them didactically so much as something that will automatically unfold in them when they're connected with. Disconnection then leads to all kinds of defenses that subvert morality. So say in the case of addiction, you will not be moral. So that human connections, there's a psychiatrist here in LA, Dan Siegel, was one of my colleagues, friends, and mentors, and he said that human connections lead to neuronal connections. In other words, human connections actually program the brain. And so when the human connections are there and they're flowing, the brain develops the circuits of morality and belonging and connection. So connection has everything to do with morality. In other words, morality is not a moral issue, but it actually is an issue of connection. And as soon as you feel connected to somebody and you really care for them, does somebody have to teach you to be moral? No, you'll be automatically moral in your behavior with them because you don't want to jeopardize the relationship. You don't want to create a rupture. So it's not morality that's lacking in this culture, it's connection that's lacking.
And when someone loses touch with their values or their kindness, what do you believe has been lost underneath?
What do you say?
What do you believe has been lost when someone loses touch with...
What has been lost?
Yeah.
Well, there's some teachers that I really respect who, and I accept this, that there's kind of a human essence that, given the right environment, will just develop and unfold, which is that we care about the world and we're connected about the world. We're connected with the world. We're a part of the world. We wouldn't, if we realized that we're part of the world, why would we hurt the world? As one spiritual teacher said, if you realize that your lungs are hanging, the half of your respiratory system is hanging up in the trees, which is the case, because without photosynthesis, we wouldn't have oxygen. Why would you hurt trees? So when we lose that connection to ourselves, that's when we lose the connection to others. And we lose the connection with the larger world. No, would you repeat the question? Because I'm not sure I quite have answered it.
Why does the emotional disconnection...
Okay, yeah, right. The emotional disconnection is with ourselves. And that everything else follows. Now, the disconnection from ourselves, however, we shouldn't blame ourselves for. Because you've never met an infant that's not connected to themselves. They know what they don't know consciously, but they experience what they feel, and they show you and communicate it to you very directly, very volubly. Now, so they're connected to themselves. We're born connected to ourselves. Then something happens to disconnect us. And it's not a mistake that we make. So, again, in the Mythonormal, I talk about this. So we have these two needs. One I've mentioned both of them already. One of them is for attachment, belonging, being held, being safe, connection, being nurtured. That's attachment. We also need to be ourselves. That's authenticity. What happens, however, and ideally we have both. Ideally, in adult relationships, we can be truly ourselves and still be connected, be attached. Now, the child, if he, she, they are in a situation where if they are themselves, if they express their true emotions, they get rejected or disapproved of, or the parents are overstressed by it, then the child has this terrible choice. I can be authentic or I can be attached, but I can't be both. What do you suppose gets sacrificed every time? It's the authenticity. And it's not, so that giving up, disconnecting from ourselves, and it's, or take somebody like our mutual friend Shannon, who's being sexually abused. What was she experiencing at that time? And she's got nobody to talk to. Nobody in the family wants to know about it. And, when this is happening repeatedly, how does she survive? By disconnected from her body. So that disconnection is actually a survival mechanism. But then later on, it becomes a problem. So these early childhood adaptations, like disconnection from the self and our authentic self, which serve a function, a protective function originally, then become problems later on. And they create ailments and disease and so on. So then as adults, there's a book that I read by an Australian woman who worked with dying people, which is what I did for 7 years as a palliative care physician. And she wrote a book called The Top 5 Regrets of Dying People. You know what the top regret was? I wish I had the courage to be myself. Now, do you want to be on your deathbed and regretting that you haven't been yourself? Now, the only problem I have with that formulation is, I wish I had the courage. That's self-blaming. It's not a question of courage. They were programmed not to be themselves by their early experience. And sometimes it takes some crisis to wake us up. Again, in the Mythonormal, I quote Sheryl Crow, the singer-songwriter, and she had breast cancer. Typically, that happens to women who suppress their authentic self in order to make their relationships work. And Sheryl Crow writes in the Mythonormal, not in the Mythonormal, sorry, she actually said in an interview, I quoted her, that until my breast cancer, I was trying to please everybody else, suppress my own needs. There was always no more, and I put myself first, she says, and there was always a voice in my head telling me everything I did was wrong. I've silenced those voices. So sometimes disease comes along. I don't recommend getting sick as a way of learning anything, but when it does come along, it can be a powerful teacher. And for Sheryl Crow is a powerful teacher that she had not been herself. And now, that's her primary intention, is to be authentic. Nobody, I don't wish on anybody that they had this regret in their dying days. That's not the only regret people had, but that was the top one.
Do you believe everyone, even those that are the most lost among us, is still reachable with compassion?
Everybody's reachable.
Yeah, well, for everyone?
Well, actually, I don't want to say that. Everybody who wants to be reached can be reached. It doesn't matter how dysfunctional or troubled or ailing they can be reached. Not everybody wants to be reached. Some people are very comfortable in their defensive shell. In fact, that's one of the toxicities of this society, is that people are so defensive that they have to keep acquiring more and more in order to feel okay about themselves. They're aggressive, so they trample all over other people. They're competitive, they have to win at all costs. And they're self-aggrandizing because their sense of self is so poor. They become CEOs, they become presidents. And then the world says, oh, isn't that wonderful? One of the toxicities of this culture is that it rewards and even admires these high levels of dysfunction. And those people are not reachable. Because as long as it's working for them, or they think it's working for them, they don't want to hear anything about what's really going on inside. And what's really interesting is, I was researching the book, I read extensively on these two rivals for the presidency in the first Trump presidency, 2016, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. They both said in interviews, almost verbatim, I don't want to look at myself too much because I don't want to find out what's there. And they both had very traumatizing childhoods.
And what's ironic is they were both innocent little children at one point.
They were born innocent children.
And they were formed into what they became.
When you read about Donald Trump's childhood in a book by his psychologist niece, Mary Trump, who is the daughter of Donald's brother Fred, who died of alcoholism. She describes Fred Sr., the paterfamilias, the father of Donald and Fred, as a sociopath who really made his kids suffer. And the mother was ill. She was totally not there to protect the kids. If you look at Hillary Clinton's childhood, her father used to beat her. And if I remember right, was very strict, would throw her out of the house, would yell at her. And I talk about this sometime. This is fascinating to me. At the Democratic Convention, when Hillary Clinton was nominated, after the nomination went through, they played a video about her life, narrated by the voice of God, Morgan Freeman. And Hillary at some point tells about this experience of resilience-building parenting. And here's the nub of it was, she's 4 years old, 5. She's bullied by neighborhood kids. So she runs into the house to her mother to seek protection. And the mother says, there's no room for cowards in this house. Now you get out there and you deal with those bullies. Now, what mother would do that? And what's the impact? The message that the child gets is not that there's no room for cowards, because a 4-year-old who wants protection, a little bear cub that runs to mother bear for protection is not a coward. He's a child. So, but this is given as an exemplar of resilience-building parenting. And the message is, suck it up. You're on your own. Now, what happens during the election campaign? Hillary develops pneumonia. What does she do with it? Doesn't tell anybody. She collapses in the street. Her husband is a serial philanderer. What does she do? She sucks it up. In fact, she says, it's probably my own fault because I didn't realize how stressed he was. Typical trauma responses. And this is celebrated. And this is in front of millions of people, and nobody said, hey, wait a minute. A 4-year-old kid wanting protection from mom is not a coward. She's somebody in need of protection. That's how toxic this culture is.
Normal is a myth.
Normal is a myth, yeah. Well, if you look at the word normal, so as a physician, I can talk about normal in a certain sense. So within a certain range of blood acidity, life is sustainable. If the pH is too high or too low, if the blood is too acidic or too alkaline, you get sick and you die. A certain range of blood pressure is normal, normal meaning healthy and natural. Outside that range, same with body temperature, normal range. Outside that range, you're at risk. So normal equates healthy and normal. Or we have another meaning for normal, which is what everybody's used to, what we take for granted. So for example, if everybody in Los Angeles beat their kids, then beating your children would be normal. As a matter of fact, at some point it was. Normal in the sense that this is what we're used to. But is it healthy and natural? The opposite of it. We now know from studies that spanking kids is just as harmful to their health as more severe physical abuse. So, but just because it was normal at some point didn't make it healthy and natural. And what I'm saying about this culture is a lot of the things that we think are normal are actually unhealthy and unnatural. That's the one meaning in which I talk about the myth of normal. The other is I've been diagnosed with ADHD. This was my first book. After I was diagnosed with it. Well, it's an abnormality, right? No, actually, it's a normal outcome of my infancy. Because in that stressed period, how did I deal with the stress? Could I escape, run away, change the situation? No, I tune out. It's a protective mechanism. But when am I tuning out? When my brain is developing. So it's a normal response to an abnormal situation. We talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, like it was a medical disease. But actually, it's a normal response to abnormal circumstances. So when we talk about these people who are abnormal, no, they're not. They're normal. They're exhibiting normal responses to abnormal situations. And there's a third sense, is that we think there's these normal people and there's abnormal people. Come on, we're all on the spectrum of some kind. I've never seen any medical, or I should say, mental health conditions that I didn't recognize some aspect of it in myself. Maybe not to the same degree, but it's not like there's a silo where you can put the abnormal people and normal people. It's just that we're on this continuum. It's a question of where are we in the continuum.
I read something recently that people who are ADHD are much more susceptible to drug addiction.
Well, that's true, and there's a good reason for it. Not just drug addiction, by the way. There's one study that showed that in a population of male alcoholics, 40% met the criteria for ADHD. Gamblers are almost always, very frequently have ADHD. So do comedians, by the way, but that's another story. Because that rapid, you know. Anyway, well, here's the reason why. How we treat ADHD, and I took these medications myself, and I'll be opportunistic enough to tell you that my book on ADHD, Scattered Minds, is on the New York Times audio bestsellers list for this month, for September. And I wrote that book 26 years ago. Wow. And that's the first book. And so I talked about how we treat ADHD, and I took medication, stimulant medication. When I wrote that book, I took medication. I didn't. When I wrote my last book, which was much more complex, much longer, and much more difficult, I didn't need any medication. My brain has changed. You can change the brain. But I took stimulant medication. What stimulant medications do is they elevate the level of dopamine in the brain. And dopamine, as I mentioned earlier, is this motivation, curiosity, incentive, aliveness chemical. People without dopamine are listless and inactive, inert. In the movie Awakenings, where Robin Williams played the psychiatrist Oliver Sacks, he gives these people dopamine for a while, and they come alive for a while. So, the dopamine circuits develop early in life, as I said earlier, in interaction with the environment. When interaction is stressful, those dopamine circuits may not develop. And then you give somebody dopamine, hey, now they're motivated, they can pay attention, they can even calm down. Now, what else elevates dopamine? Cocaine does. A lot of crystal meth does. So not all, but a significant minority of stimulant addicts are actually self-medicating ADHD. And the pornography addict, as I said earlier, gets his dopamine hits. The gambler gets his dopamine hits. The shopping addict, like me, I get a dopamine hit. It's a dopamine deficiency. So, and all addictions elevate dopamine. So therefore, of course there's an overlap, significant overlap between ADHD and addictions, because they both arise out of different levels of childhood stress, and they both involve the dopamine circuitry. So of course there's an overlap.
Mind and body are inseparable, aren't they?
They're one. There's a great American scientist called Candace Pert, and she coined the phrase mind-body. This is one phrase. It's one unit. So whatever happens, see, I could change your physiology in a split second without touching you, without giving you any substance, just by screaming at you. Your physiology would change. Your adrenal gland would start, the amygdala, the fear center in your brain, would send messages to a gland in your brain that would send messages to another gland that would send messages to your adrenal gland that would secrete cortisol and adrenaline, and all of a sudden, your heart would beat faster, your muscles would be stronger, you'd be faster, you'd be more alert, and you could counter the threat. Then your cortisol levels will go up, give you more sugar to have more energy. So the mind-body. And all because I yelled at you. Now, that unity is 24/7. So our emotions and our mind states are forever affecting our physiological states. And so a lot of illnesses that people have. Now, I mentioned the study that the more episodes of racism a black American woman experiences, the greater the risk of asthma. Now, we've also known for decades now, not that most doctors are told this, but there's been all kinds of studies in the medical literature, scientific literature, that the more stressed parents are, the more likely the kids are to have asthma. In other words, stress in the parents triggers inflammation in the air tubes and narrowing of the air tubes. Now, how do we treat asthma? You know how we treat asthma? You give people adrenaline and cortisol. Now, what are adrenaline and cortisol? They're stress hormones. As a matter of fact, across medicine, if you go to a dermatologist with a skin rash, what are they going to give you? Cortisol cream. If you go to a gastroenterologist with inflamed intestines, very frequently they'll give you cortisol. If you go to a neurologist with inflammation in your nervous system, as in multiple sclerosis, very often they'll give you cortisol. I could go on. You'd think we'd ask ourselves as physicians, and this is where the training of the medical profession is so woefully lacking. I'm not criticizing individual doctors. I'm saying that the medical culture is so lacking. We're giving cortisol for everything. We're giving the stress hormone for everything. You think we'd ask ourselves, gosh, does stress maybe have something to do with the onset of these conditions? No. Even though there's all these studies that show that, yes, stress is implicated in conditions of the nervous system, of the gut, in malignancy, in autoimmune disease, and so on, which we treat with cortisol. But we never make this mind-body connection that Candace Pert and so many others have demonstrated over and over again in the laboratory and in clinical practice, and yet it's almost completely ignored in medical practice, almost completely.
Well, why do you think medicine often treats symptoms without exploring the root causes?
Well, one of the reasons is the utter failure of medical education to educate, to inform practitioners about the mind-body unity. Let me give you an example. I think the second book I wrote is called When the Body Says No, which is about the mind-body unity. When people don't know how to say no, they take on too much, their body will say no in the form of illness. Here at UCLA, there's a rheumatologist who deals with autoimmune diseases. She read the book, and I saw her at a conference 5 years ago. And she said to me, since reading your book, when I see these people with autoimmune disease like lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, I start asking them about their childhoods. I start asking them about their stresses. I start asking them when they're not saying no. And you know what? I can reduce the medications, and very often they don't need medication anymore. And I've seen such cases all over the world, believe me. And then she says, so I asked her if I could interview her for my next book, which is, and she said, no, at least you can't use my name because my colleagues would scorn me out for practicing scientific medicine. That's how bad it is. I tell another story. There was a teacher at Harvard in the late 1930s. His name was, is this okay or am I telling too many stories?
No, it's great.
All right.
I love your stories.
Yeah. There was a teacher at Harvard in the late 1930s, early 40s. His name was Selma Weiss. Like me, he was a Hungarian Jew, but he came from Transylvania, which at that time was part of Romania, but it was a Hungarian-speaking part. And he came to, he taught at Harvard. He's so revered at Harvard that to this day they have an annual Selma Weiss Research Day in his honor. Okay, so that's how revered he was. In 1939, he gave a lecture to the medical school class in which he said that emotional factors are at least as important in the causation of illness as physical ones, and they must be at least as important in the treatment. He said this in 1939. His lecture was published in the Journal of the Medical Association in 1940. Now, jump ahead to the present. A few years ago, I was interviewing a psychiatrist at Harvard. His name is Dr. Jeff Rediger. And he's a department head at one of the hospitals at Harvard. And Jeff wrote a book called Cured, about people who seem to get better from terminal illnesses without medical treatment or despite the failure of medical treatment. So I was very interested to talk to him. Anyway, so we were talking with Jeff, and Jeff told me that to talk about mind-body health at Harvard is to jeopardize your career. Now, it's changing. They've now established an institute for mind-body, but he said it's changing, but it's very slow. Now, so here's Selma Weiss saying this wisdom, how many years ago now? We're looking at 70 years ago, 80 years ago, I don't know. And they honor his name, but they've totally forgotten what he taught. That's how absurd it is.
Talk to me about how modern culture disconnects us from ourselves.
Well, again, that disconnection happens in early childhood. And so one of the first impetus to disconnection is stress or trauma in the family of origin. When that stress or trauma gets too much, or the traumatic situation gets too much, the person disconnects so as not to feel the anger, so as not to feel the pain. So that's the first way. Then we send kids to school, where what we value is behavior and achievement. We don't actually care about the internal experience of the child. So kids get the message that they're valued not for who they are, but for what they show the world. So that's the second way. The third way then is the culture of certain expectations of how we should be, how we should look, how we should act. Now, a child who gets the message that they're not important just for existing, they're not worthy just for existing, will then trying to make themselves worthy by, say, becoming a helper. And a lot of people go to medical school because they have this need to be important. I mean, there's all kinds of good reasons to go to medical school, but a very frequent unconscious need is just the sense of importance. People that are not valued for who they are will be always trying to measure up to the people's expectations. If you don't get the sense that you're liked, you'll try to be very nice all the time so they will like you, suppressing yourself. If you weren't loved for who you are, you might become very charming, so people will love you. In other words, we develop these personalities, not based on who we actually are, but to gain the approval of other people. It's all very addictive, because it's always very temporary. So part of my workaholism was, it doesn't matter how many people admired me or praised my work or wanted my help. I keep it. That's the nature of any addiction. You have to have more and more and more. If you have 15 friends on Facebook, you'll want 30. If you got 30, if you have so many followers on Instagram, you'll be checking your numbers all the time. It's never enough. So that's another form of dysfunction. Then there's the physical stuff. We value what we consider to be physical beauty. And it's okay to admire beauty, but to make it an essential human attribute and make people suffer if they don't meet the standards. So look at here in Hollywood, all these people that are forever trying to change their bodies through surgery because they need to look a certain way. What a disconnection from the self. Because actually, you are who you are. And what if you could accept that? Wouldn't it be, imagine the sense of peace if you could accept who you are.
Then people would be more attractive as well.
That's the whole point.
Yeah. When someone walks into a room, how quickly can you sense the trauma that they're carrying?
How quickly can I
This order's coming right from the top. The drilling machine that you recovered from LaRoe's quarry, we need you to deliver it to the port. And the drilling machine from the lava quarry to the railway station. There's also other mining supplies for both locations. But you can plot a route for our trucks to deliver them. I know, that's a lot of hassle in drilling machines. Expensive ones too. So be careful with them.
sense of trauma of
that they carry.
with the person.
Mm-hmm.
Give me 5 minutes.
You've seen a lot.
Give me 5 minutes. Sometimes give me 5 seconds, because they carry it in their face.
Yeah.
You can hear it in the tone of voice. You can see it in their body language. But if it needs the conversation, give me 5 minutes.
Do you believe the body remembers everything, even when the mind forgets?
Yeah. It's not that the mind forgets, it's that the memory is not available to conscious awareness. So there's two kinds of memory. There's explicit memory, which is recall. Like a few minutes ago I was talking and I was talking about these glands in the brain. I actually forgot the name of the gland. It's the hypothalamus. But old age moment, it escaped me for a moment. It's not really that I forgot, but it wasn't available to me at that moment. Well, a lot of the early memories are pre-verbal. So verbal memory, the capacity to recollect episodes, the structure in the brain that encodes that, the hippocampus, doesn't begin to develop. Doesn't come online till about 3 years of age. So nobody recalls anything. Recall means you can call it back. You can call back what you had to breakfast this morning. You can call back what your grade 5 teacher might have said to you on a good day or on a bad day. That's recall. That's called explicit memory. But there's another kind of memory, which is non-hippocampal. It's non-verbal. It's the imprint of emotional experiences from in utero onwards. It's in there. It's just not accessible to conscious awareness. And also what happens is, when people are traumatized, when they're really being hurt, the brain is flooded with cortisol and the hippocampus goes offline. And then something happens later on, and then the memory comes back. And this happens to a lot of people. I think it happened to Shannon. That stuff started recurring to her conscious memory that previously was inaccessible to her. So yes, the body remembers everything, but it doesn't recall everything. But it's not unusual, for example, for somebody to go to a massage therapist or a physiotherapist, and they'll massage or touch or press on a certain muscle or a certain part of the body, and the person is flooded with emotion. That's the body remembering. And so the body does remember, it keeps a record. As my friend Bessel van der Kolk says, the body keeps the score. And somebody else, I think it was, I forget the name of the author, first name is Babette, I forget her surname. I think she called it the body remembers. Yeah, the body does remember. And whether or not that memory is accessible depends on the circumstance.
Do you think some people secretly don't want to heal because their pain feels like their identity?
That's true. They so identify with their trauma, they don't even conceive of the possibility of healing. And it's also true that sometimes there's what you call a secondary benefit. So let's say I've interviewed people who said that when they got sick, it's the only time they could ask for help. Now they have an excuse to ask for help. Well, if you believe that you're only worthy of health, only worthy of help when you're ill, then you might not want to give up the identity as an ill person, because now you have a reason to ask for help, to get some attention. So yeah, there are some people who are so identified with their pain because it gives them some kind of benefit.
In a lot of the stories on my channel, it's obvious that the addiction is about killing the pain, but also sometimes it appears like the addiction is about killing the self. They almost seem so self-destructive that they're trying to kill themselves.
I'm not sure I agree with that. But to the extent that I do,
Well, like when somebody is doing fentanyl and they overdose 12 times and they're doing it again.
well, let's say I agree with you.
Okay.
Okay, they're trying to kill themselves. It's not themselves they're trying to kill. It's their suffering they're trying to kill. The person who thinks about suicide, and I certainly have, not that I've done it or I've ever planned it or ever intended it, but I've certainly imagined it. That's just, how can I escape the suffering? So even if a person wants to kill themselves, it's because they can't imagine themselves without suffering, and the suffering is too much. So even that impulse, there's some self-saving dynamic behind it.
With the recent release or all the attention that these GLP-1 drugs are getting for weight loss,
Yeah.
can you imagine how that would impact the addiction world if there was a similar drug that treated alcoholism and addiction?
Interestingly enough, and I don't remember this, I could be misspeaking here, but I think I saw one article about how those drugs have a positive impact on addictions.
Yeah.
On addictions.
The cravings.
Yeah, because it's all about craving, isn't it?
Yeah, it just suppresses the craving.
Well, I tell you, here's the issue. I'm not sure that the last word has been written yet on these new drugs. I know they're the rage right now, and I've certainly read the articles about their benefits. Here's what we don't know. What is their long-term effect? After decades, we have no idea. They haven't been around long enough. Number one, so it's a bit of an experiment, a massive experiment. Number one. Number two, what seems to be the case is that they work as long as you take them.
You stop taking it,
Comes
right back.
And if you stop, nothing's changed, except that your craving has been temporarily suppressed. But you haven't healed. And obesity is not it's like any other addiction, the eating. It's just another way of people trying to comfort themselves with junk foods and overeating in a highly stressed society. So these drugs, for all their benefits, and again, we'll have to see after decades what their impact really is in the long term. They don't solve the underlying problem. Which I'm not telling people not to take them, that's their call, but I'm telling you, they're not a long-term solution unless you take them for the rest of your life, which we don't know what the outcome will be.
I mean, so far there's a lot of positive
it looks
things
good.
about them.
Yeah, and a lot of people swear by them.
Yeah. Certainly a lot of people losing a lot of weight.
It's true.
Yeah. Why do people sabotage the very love that they're desperate for in like romantic relationships?
Well, again, I'm very careful about language. Now, a saboteur, if somebody wanted to sabotage the airport, is it LAX, the airport here?
Mm-hmm.
If somebody wanted to sabotage the airport, they'd plan it, they'd have a deliberate intention to cause harm, they'd have a scheme, a plan that they would execute to commit this act of sabotage. When you say sabotaging the very thing they want, does the person actually plan, have a conscious intent?
Or is it more fear?
Sorry?
Or you're saying it might be more fear?
It's more about fear. And sometimes it's just the acting out of impulses they got no regulation over that will have the effect of damaging the relationship, but they're not trying to sabotage anything. And sometimes it's even testing the relationship. Mm-hmm. Will I still be loved?
I think very often it's that.
Yeah. So it's not, the intention is not to sabotage.
Mm-hmm. Is there a point where healing becomes learning to live with the wound instead of fixing it?
To some degree. It's learning to live with the pain. So I have this deep sense of abandonment because of what happened to me when I was 11 months of age, being given to a stranger. So in my relationship, when I perceive that I'm being abandoned, by the way, I'm not. It's just a perception that I have based on old programming. My tendency is to, again, to withdraw. That's my default setting, is to withdraw and to get sullen and to close down. What if I could just say to myself, and by the way, increasingly this has been the case, well, I'm feeling pain right now. Can I just stay with the pain and not withdraw? So it's not so much to live with the wound, but to live with the pain. Can we live with pain without having to escape from it? I think that's a key question. And eventually, of course, I learned the day I'm not being abandoned, and even if I was, I can handle it because I'm an adult. But it's being, in life we have to develop the capacity to be with the pain and be with the grief, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, one last question, Gabor. After all your years of fabulous work, what do you hope the world finally understands about trauma?
That it's very human, that it's almost universal, that it has multiple consequences, as I've been outlining, and that it can be healed. And ultimately, and most importantly, it's not your fault. You're not flawed. You're not damaged goods. Nobody is.
All right. Gabor Mate, thank you so much for the fabulous talk.
Thanks so much.
Your new book is The Myth of Normal?
That's one of my books, yeah?
But yeah, you have, how many books do you have?
It's the most recent one. I've written 5 books. People can look them up. The Myth of Normal is the most recent.
Yeah, I'm sure they're all great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
When I was designing the first Soft White Underbelly book, I realized that there were so many great portraits that weren't going to make it into that book. They just wouldn't fit. And once I saw how well that first book sold, I knew I'd have to design a second book. This second book is finally ready to ship. Like the first one, this book has a collection of some of the best portraits from Soft White Underbelly, accompanied by a quote from that person's interview. This book features another group of Rebecca portraits, as well as a collection of color images of the Whitaker family, and plenty of others. You can order yours for $125 or $150 for a signed copy at softwhiteunderbelly.org. Again, like the first book, once this book is sold out, I will not be printing more of them. The portraits are what Soft White Underbelly is all about, and these 2 books contain the best of all that work. Thank you for watching.
I get outside to the ambulance bay and all I see is this blue car, older model, and it is just riddled with bullets. The windows are all shot out. I'm like, oh, like shit. This is like legit. Rule 1 of emergency medicine is you take a quick pause and you look around, make sure it's safe for you to approach the situation. So quick pause, look around, I see one kid standing outside of the car on his phone. And I'm like, okay, he's covered in blood, but he's standing, he's talking. Not priority right now. I look in the back seat, I see a very animated, what looks like a female, and someone that's not moving. So I'm like, bingo, that's my priority. Swing the car door open, and all I see is a kid hunched over, his girlfriend or whoever is freaking out, and he has, it's called agonal respirations, which is, it's end of death breathing. It sounds like basically it's the body trying to get any air into its vital organs. And then I'm like, oh, okay, not good. I pull out my pen light to assess, see if there's any glass so I don't hurt myself. And all I see is brain matter, just all over the car. And I'm just like, oh, fuck.
All right, Igor.
Good morning.
Igor, you are, what do you call your profession? What do you do?
I'm an emergency department nurse.
Emergency department nurse.
Yes, sir.
And you work on one of the downtown.
I do. I work downtown Los Angeles, down the street from MacArthur Park.
Oh, well, you're right in the heart of it.
The heart of it. It's an interesting clientele that we get all day and all night in the emergency department.
What kind of people are coming in?
Everyone. So I live, of course, if you're familiar with Los Angeles, right? You have Koreatown right there. You have Chinatown. You have East Hollywood. You have Hollywood. You have, unfortunately, the homeless population of that area. And so we get all of them, sometimes all at once.
I'm sure you've seen people that are on my channel in your
maybe
in your emergency room.
Unfortunately, can't disclose that, but maybe I have.
That's right. I'm certain you have.
Right.
What made you want to get into this field?
You know, they asked that question in nursing school orientation. This was COVID times, pandemic, so Zoom, and the director asked that same question: why do you want to be a nurse? And going around the boxes of everyone's giving these amazing stories of my mom was in the hospital and the nurses were amazing and to get care of her, or I was in the hospital, or my significant other, whatever. And then as they're saying all this, I'm like, do I lie in this moment to sound like I fit in with this group of my future colleagues, or do I say the truth? And I was like, you know, don't lie, because when you lie, it always comes back to you. And it's my turn to speak, and I said, I just thought I'd be good at it. And that was the true, honest answer. Because I was a lifeguard before that. I've been in medical emergencies. I've always performed well in them. Mm-hmm. And when I switched from psychology to nursing, I was like, okay, what am I good at? Chest compressions. Who does chest compressions? Nurses. Let's be a nurse. And that was the segue into nursing.
Good for you.
Yeah.
How old are you?
33.
33.
Yeah.
You're from Russia?
Ukraine, Odessa.
Ukraine?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I've been here since 2000.
Yeah. People don't name their sons Igor.
No, usually not. I've only met one other one, and he was from Brazil.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
So, what is the majority of the people you'll see? Like addiction stories, or?
It's everyone. It's addiction, it's of course overdoses and drug use, it's heart failure, it's strokes, it's heart attacks. It's in the emergency department, we are the jacks of all trades. I'm expected to know how to respond to every emergency that walks in through that door. And that's your pediatrics, your neonatals, your labor and delivery, like your mothers that are coming in pregnant, giving birth. It's your heart attacks, strokes, your overdoses. I'm expected to know how to respond to all of that. And there's no such thing as a common night. It's from 5 minutes to 10 minutes to 15 minutes, we'll see an overdose, someone who's in cardiac arrest, and someone who's checked in because they ate too many hot wings. And so it's just complete controlled chaos all night.
How does this job affect your personal life?
It's made me more calm. It's we're on shift for 12 hours at a time, 3 nights a week. And so outside of work, I've calmed down a lot. I've noticed that, like in traffic, someone cuts me off. In the past, I'm like, you know, motherfucker. Now it's just, they have bigger problems to worry about. The rest of my life is calm, relaxed, no stress. But it's also made me reevaluate friendships and relationships. I'm around a lot of death, and so are my colleagues. And in their last moments, no one's asking to see their bank account, to see their trophies, to see their accolades. They're all calling out for family, for friends. They want to see pictures of their loved ones. And so that's made me think, like, yes, it's great to have things, but relationships is what kind of drives us forward.
Yeah, absolutely it does.
Yeah, it's just changed my whole perspective on life and how life is short. I'm heading to the gym after we're done here. Mm-hmm. I can drive off onto Main Street and get into a car accident and pass away in 2 hours.
Yeah.
And that's just made me, if I want to do something, I just do it. Obviously, as long as it's safe and only affects me. But I just live my life the way I want to live it and not the way someone says I should.
Yeah. Yeah. When it hits you, it hits hard.
Yeah.
Especially when it hits close to home.
Yeah. And it's just being around that with me and my colleagues. We just all tight knit together. And then when we're outside of work, they all have families and kids, etc. But it's all very family. Let's spend time together. How are you? It's time off social media. It's all very in the moment living.
What do you think of the fentanyl epidemic?
Oh, it's horrible. It is absolutely horrible.
Because before fentanyl, heroin, you could overdose and die, but it was rare.
Yes.
But with fentanyl, it's so common.
It's cheap, and it gets you high. And most of the overdoses that we see is fentanyl. There's classes of overdoses that we see in the emergency department. We have those who were found, let's say, MacArthur Park, I'll use an example. Someone called 911, firefighters showed up, and they gave them a medication called Narcan, also known as naloxone. It's in the field, they use it as a nasal spray. We have IV. Patients already awake, alert by the time they get to the hospital, and usually they either just jump off the medic gurney and walk out, or they get violent and aggressive towards us because someone just killed their high, and then they end up leaving. Or option is they're still very groggy and we monitor them for a few hours, make sure that they don't fall back into an overdose, and then they are discharged back to wherever they live. And of course, option number 3 is they come in and they've overdosed and they've been down for too long, and now we're doing CPR and giving them life-saving medications, hopefully shocking them with a defibrillator, and that's kind of the worst case scenario, is when they end up in the ICU or they don't make it.
And as I learned painfully last week, they're putting fentanyl in all kinds of drugs.
Yes, so in the emergency department, for some reason, it's always things come in clusters. If we see 1 stroke, we're gonna see 3 more. If we see 1 cardiac arrest, we're gonna see 3 more. I don't know, it's like the medical gods, I don't understand it. We had one night when people that were dressed nice were coming in as overdoses. And I mean that in the most respectful way. Usually our overdoses are the homeless population, and they're not dressed nice, but we were getting women in dresses, we were getting men in tuxedos, all testing positive for fentanyl and cocaine. And they were out partying, and what they thought they were doing was cocaine, party drug, as we all know, mixed with fentanyl, and they were just all overdosing. And when they would wake up, they're like, hey, I did cocaine tonight. Last thing I remember is being at this party, having fun, and now I'm here. I don't know what happened. And they're like, hey, you tested positive for fentanyl. And so they're just shocked to learn this. And it's just amazing that they're using multiple drugs and selling it as one thing, and now people are dying from it. Yeah. And about a month ago, 3 weeks ago, we had a string of overdoses, just nonstop. And usually the fire department, they spread the love. They'll send a few patients to this hospital, this hospital, this hospital. And we later found out that, I don't know how the drug world works, but the manufacturer had different dosages, different syringes of different product. And whoever was at the local park, and they had 8 different syringes, labeled 8 different ways, and they were just coming up to people and injecting them at the park, and then sitting back and watching. Who reacted how? Did this person passed away? This person's really high. This person is freaking out. This person's high. And they were marking down notes of how these different dosages were affecting the people. And the only reason we found that out was the police told us, like, hey, be prepared because we're sending you a bunch of overdoses tonight. And on this people, like the Narcan was working, on these it wasn't, so we didn't even know what was in it. It was, some of them were being PCP, fentanyl, cocaine, others it was just a mess.
Just using homeless people as
guinea pigs.
As guinea pigs.
And this job has showed me how inhumane people can be, and how life to someone else, your life doesn't matter. And the people that we were able to resuscitate, they would wake up and say, hey, I do drugs, but I didn't do any today. I don't know why I'm here. And then we examine, and there's a pin mark on their neck or their arm or somewhere. Horrible. And it's just, these dealers just don't care. And with this, and fentanyl especially, it's just non-stop. All night we get the overdoses, and all day. And every hospital in America probably.
And it's probably in other drugs, like even weed, they could probably put it in?
Sometimes. Sometimes it's rare, because with weed, it seems like since it's legal now, here in California, most get it from dispensaries.
Yeah.
So it doesn't seem to be
when
mixed.
you're buying it on the street.
Yeah, but the homeless population, they'll get it mixed with other things.
Yeah.
Yeah. I used to smoke weed. I used it for sleep reasons, and then I became a nurse, and that's no longer allowed. But I would get it from the dispensary, and I was never concerned. But I can imagine from the street that you should be paranoid that it's being mixed with something else.
Yeah. But with drugs like cocaine, it's always coming from the street.
Yeah, you can't buy medical grade cocaine, unfortunately.
No.
And and I know we were talking before we started, and it's just very unfortunate. And this epidemic of drug use it has the hospital at its knees, because we're not focused on things that are preventable versus things that are not, like heart attacks and strokes. And we just get these horrible overdoses that most that survive just wake up and start swinging on us because we just killed their high. Yeah.
I'm sure you have some interesting stories.
Yeah, I mean, I was just in court for an assault case a couple of months ago. A gentleman came in, high as a kite. He started swinging at us, and as my colleague Jim and I were trying to hold him down until security gets there, he spit at us. And that's an assault. And as of January 1st, this new district attorney made it that any assault on a healthcare worker is a felony. And so police came, took him away, and we had court, spent the morning in court and the judge basically ruled that he's now going to go to jail because it's not his first time, and he's no longer allowed to come to the hospital where I work at unless he's unconscious in an ambulance. And that's the good story. That's we won.
And it probably also gets him clean for a couple months.
Yeah, he has mandatory rehab, mandatory anger management. But all these assault cases are not like this. I have a colleague now, he's been out for 3 months now because he was standing at the door doing his job. Person's coming up, he says, "What are you here for, sir?" And this homeless individual shoulder checked. And my colleague's had a torn pec now for 3 months, has been on medical leave, has to have surgery next week. And we have cases like this almost every night. I was bit a little while ago by a patient, had to check.
Yeah, you're bitten.
I was, and it was kind of my fault because that's why I'm a nurse and not a professional fighter. My hand should not have been next to his face, but he punched a security officer. And he didn't know that I was behind him, so I brought him to the floor. And in the scuffle, he bit my wrist. And I was like, cool, now I have to check in, antibiotics, tetanus shot, the whole nine. And this is, we've all been kicked, punched, scratched, bitten, spit on. One case was, a patient was discharged on a day shift, I'm night shift. They had an emesis bag, which is what you throw up in. And they waited for the day shift nurses to leave, and they threw it at him. And 5 of the day shift nurses got covered in vomit. And disgusting.
That is disgusting.
Yeah. But yeah, these assault cases are pretty common in healthcare, unfortunately.
There's got to be some sad cases too.
Yeah, there was a nurse in Florida a few months ago. I believe it was Florida. She got her face completely fractured by one of these patients. I mean, he beat her up, and she ended up in critical condition in the ICU, I believe. And of course, they caught him and they put him in jail. But this nurse, she's done being a nurse. Her face is mangled, unfortunately, and she was now probably going to be having PTSD for the rest of her life because this male attacked this female nurse and just completely shattered her face.
Yeah, the combination of drugs and mental illness
Yes.
is just so out of control.
Mm-hmm. And it's different me talking about this because I'm a bigger human. And
you're 6'6".
6'6", I weigh 250 pounds. Me talking about assault, everyone's like, your name is Igor, you're gonna be fine. Versus one of my colleagues who's 5'2", weighs 100 pounds wet, and I work with some of the baddest women I've ever worked with, but me taking a punch and her taking a punch is two very different situations. And that's why it's always something's going on until security gets there. Igor, I'm like, all right, on my way, because I can at least, my stature deters most situations, but when they're hopped up on who knows what, they don't care. And PCP is making a resurgence. And as a man, if you've ever wanted to be humbled, try to tussle with someone who's high on PCP. You think you're strong? No. These men are just, 6 of us are holding them down on the bed, and they are still bucking us.
Yeah.
We're just like, oh my God, please get the restraints.
Yeah, Corey, who drives around with me on Skid Row, he's my little helper down there.
Mm-hmm.
He and I will see people on the street or see crazy things happening, and first thing we say out of our mouth, that's PCP, or that's crystal meth, or that's, you can just look at a person now and know what their drug is.
Yeah, and
sometimes it's just mental illness.
Yeah, and that's the hard line right there, because perfect example, if I get a patient who are high on something, but they're also showing signs of mental illness, now we have to dance this fine line of okay, do we treat them for they're high, and that's why they are behaving the way they're behaving, and we let them metabolize and sober up, and then send them to a psychiatric facility, which never happens, because once they sober up, they always leave. Because
they're free to leave.
They're free to leave. You are not forced to stay at the hospital. The second you want to leave, you can stand up and walk away. We are not a closed-door psychiatric facility. And even if you're in our psychiatric unit, if you stand up and you are alert, you can tell me your name, you can tell me the year, and at least maybe the president, you can leave. And I will not chemically or physically restrain you. But if you stand up and you are gibberish talking and you're not able to walk properly, then unfortunately we do have to chemically or physically restrain you until you're able to give us some basic answers about yourself or about the world. And most people don't seek that, don't stay long enough to get the mental health benefits. They stay long enough to get the medical benefits, but not transferred out to all these centers that we have contracts with to get them the proper medication that they need. Because we get it frequent where they say, like, I'm on, let's say, Seroquel. When's the last time you took it? It's been months. That's not good. And then by the time it's trying to transfer out, they're gone. They just run away.
Is there anything you think that the city or the country, the state, or whatever could do better about this whole situation?
Just regarding like mental illness and drugs?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
It seems to be growing and getting worse.
It's getting exponentially worse. When I speak to nurses that have been nurses for 10, 20 years, they say it was not like this before. But also where I work, it's not the best in regards to that. But I think that early recognition, because when in nursing school, so my background is psychology. I wanted to be a sports psychologist, but then I decided I didn't like it anymore, so that's why I switched to nursing. I have a good foundation of what does bipolar look like, what does schizophrenia, what is all these different disorders, what they might present as. Where in nursing school, you cover it for 10 weeks, and that's it. So it's early recognition would be my number one as kind of government funded. Let's train our triage nurses on early recognition of, is this drugs or is this a person who's about to have a psychotic break? That would be my biggest kind of thing that I would want to see. Because it's oftentimes, it's like, oh, they're just high. I'm like, no, they're not just high. Like, she is clearly manic and she's bipolar. Like, we need to watch her. Versus like, oh, here's some medications, like discharge back to the street, which just happens often.
Therapy should be mandatory for all of us.
Yeah, I mean,
all of us. Like everyone from the top of society on down.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, especially in my field, I think that we should all be offered complimentary therapy.
For sure.
Yeah. Because like there are things that we see on a daily that I think are normal now, where if I tell these stories, people are looking at me horrified. Just like, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, why? Oh, yeah, I guess you don't see that often.
What's the most gruesome thing you've seen?
Oh man, there's so many. I can share a recent one.
Sure.
It was a few months ago. Typical night in the ER, which means it's not a typical night because it's the ER. And my assignment that night was resource nurse, which is you just, as it sounds, you resource the unit, you help whoever needs help. Security runs in. They're like, hey, I think we have a homeboy drop-off in the ambulance bay. And a homeboy drop-off is typically gang members don't want to check in and give their name because they're gang members. And what they do is they have an injured, friend. Homie. Mm-hmm. They just kick them out of the car, whether they're stabbed, beat up, shot. They just kick them out of the car into the ambulance bay. And then we run out and we grab them and do our thing. Homie drop-off, right? Makes sense. And security runs in, like, hey, we think we have a homie drop-off, etc. So I'm free. I don't have an assignment, so I can just go. I get outside to the ambulance bay, and all I see is this blue car, older model, and it is just riddled with bullets. The windows are all shot out. I'm like, oh, like shit, this is like legit. Rule 1 of emergency medicine is you take a quick pause and you look around, make sure it's safe for you to approach the situation. So quick pause, look around. I see one kid standing outside of the car on his phone. And I'm like, okay, he's covered in blood, but he's standing, he's talking. Not priority right now. I look in the back seat, I see a very animated, what looks like a female, and someone that's not moving. So I'm like, bingo, that's my priority. Swing the car door open, and all I see is a kid hunched over. His girlfriend or whoever is freaking out. And it's called agonal respirations, which is, it's end of death breathing. It sounds like basically the body trying to get any air into its vital organs. And then I'm like, oh, okay, not good. I pull out my pen light to assess, see if there's any glass so I don't hurt myself. And all I see is brain matter just all over the car. And I'm just like, oh, fuck. I grab the kid. At this point, my colleagues have a gurney coming. I place this kid on the gurney. And then I'm like, okay, go. And then now my attention's on this other kid. And I look at him once again, get my pen light, shine it, covered in just blood. And I'm like, hey man, are you shot? Are you hurt? And then he's like, I don't know. And then I look at him closer and he has bullet holes. He's wearing like a long sleeve black sweater and he just has bullet holes all over his sweater. And I'm just like, oh no. And then he's pale as a ghost. He faints. I luckily scoop him up And I can't yell out gurney because they just brought it. So I just carry him to the inside the emergency department, put him on the bed, and any trauma, we strip off the clothes, etc. At this point, the initial kid that I pulled out of the car, he's now intubated, fluids are running. My colleagues are trying to stabilize him with one of the doctors, Dr. Villacorta, amazing physician. Luckily, he was there that night. Charge nurse is on the phone with a level 1 trauma hospital because we are not, saying like, you have a patient coming in, and I'm like, hey, well, you have 2 patients now coming in. Now we have 2 ambulances en route to us to take these people to this trauma center. Luckily, the patient I was working with, he was only shot in the shoulder and arm multiple times. Few inches, it was his left arm. So a few more inches to the right, he would have been his heart, but he got very lucky. I stabilized him, gave him pain medicine, gave him like anti-nausea medicine, gave him some fluids, he was fine. The other kid, we didn't find out until later. Unfortunately, he